Well, good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to our October Lunchtime Dial-In. We're really glad that you've been able to join us today, whether you're here listening live or catching up with a recording later, as I know many of you are. We're looking forward to sharing information on the latest updates as they relate to churches and charities in the Christian sector. And we hope this session is going to be really helpful to you. For those of you who are new, my name's Jackie Fletcher. I'll be your host today. I'm going to be joined by three of my colleagues. We have Rachel Steeden, who's our head of legal, Lawrence Duplessis, who is a director of church and charity professional services, and Stephen Matthews, whose voice will be familiar to many of you as he's one of our long-standing senior consultants. I'm also delighted that we're joined today by a guest from the ICAEW. And if, like me, you have no idea what that stands for, it's from the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales. So Christina Kopic, who's the head of charity and voluntary sector, will be sharing some wisdom with us later in the programme today. So, as I'm sure most of you will be aware, here at Stewardship, our mission is to transform generosity by inspiring greater generosity, making giving count, and the purpose of today's dial-in, which is to strengthen Christian causes, making them good to give to. If you're interested in finding out more about the ways we can support your church or charity, you can check out all of our services and resources on our website, or do feel free to call the church and charity team. They would love to speak to you. And the number's on the screen now, and we'll also send it out later in the follow-up email. If you'd like to make sure that you receive the follow-up materials, including the recording of this session, you'll just need to ensure that you're signed up to the dial-in mailing list. If you haven't done that yet, just email us to find out how, and we'll get you set up to go. So moving on to today, today's agenda looks short, but there's a lot of meat in here. We're going to be looking at a stewardship guide to governance and trustees, a section on online meetings and whether your charity's governing document is up to date, a section on dispelling common myths about charities, and finally, quite a hot topic at the moment, challenges with charity banking. And we'll finish the session with our usual Q&A slot at the end. So please do bring your questions on today's topics. Now, if you have any questions during the presentations, just use the chat function to ask them, and we'll answer as many as we can in the time we have together. If you haven't joined us before, the instructions are just up on the screen now. And before we get started on our agenda, let's just pray. Lord, we thank you for this opportunity to take a look at the ways that we can strengthen our Christian causes. We thank you for each church and charity represented here today. We pray that what is shared will give insight, knowledge, and confidence, and that we will be good representatives for you in our work and communities. In Jesus' name, amen. Right, moving on to our first section, we have Stephen, who's going to talk about governance and trustees. Stephen.
Thank you, Jackie. Now, we have recently reviewed and added to our group of papers on charity governance. We've always believed here at Stewardship that great churches and ministries need great trustees. We know talented and anointed spiritual leadership is critical to the dynamic of ministry life, but so also we think is this vague thing called governance. It isn't just a charity law hassle imposed on churches and ministries so we can tick the charity box and get the tax backs. It is crucial, so it seems to us, to the health of the church or ministry and the way it works. There are 5 elements to our group of papers. These are 1, what to look for in a trustee, which is not just an issue of technical knowledge. There's 1 on the technical issues of trustee appointments, powers, duties, and responsibilities. Third one is about what makes effective trustee boards. Fourthly, the interaction between trustees and spiritual leaders, which is such an important subject. And finally, trustees' financial responsibilities and reporting. These papers do have technical content, but being a good trustee and operating well as a trustee team is not just technicalities, nor is it just about finance and legal stuff, divorced from the real work of the church, nor about creating policies which tick charity commission boxes. In its simplest form, good governance is about issues of authority, decision-making, and accountability. We see good governance taught in the New Testament. 2 Corinthians 8, Paul talks about in connection with handling finance, We are taking great care to do what's right, not only in the eyes of the Lord, but also in the eyes of men. In the eyes of the Lord is about heart and integrity. In the eyes of men is about relationship and reputation. And again in Romans 13 and 1 Peter 2, we're urged to be subject to the governing authorities. Yet every week at the moment, we're seeing something in the media that reflects poor leadership and governance in the church or Christian ministry. This is very sad. Goes against the heart of Christ, works against the gospel. And in those ministries, it tends to spoil the ability to fulfill the vision. Now, good governance is about helping a church or charity promote an attitude and culture where everything works towards fulfilling the charity's vision. The goal is to intentionally create a culture that maintains a health of the organization in the way it's run. It ensures compliance with general rules and regulations, but also operates in line with what is best practice, treating people well, whoever they are, doing things well whenever we can. Good governance sets the tone for an organization. And by protecting its reputation for doing things well, it prioritizes the reputation of the gospel. This is not to replace, in any sense of the word, the spiritual leadership and their vital role, or executive leadership with committee management involving more trustees. But the aim is to create a culture where executive decisions are made well in the context of accountability and team, allowing for diversity of thought and ideas that are open to internal and external input and challenge. All of this leads to healthy decision making, and with intention it's maintained and refreshed over time. Seen in this light, governance is much more than a legal or regulatory exercise. Now, of course, it's easy to say all this, but it's not so easy to do. I just wanted to give a few quick tips from things I've seen. Firstly, trustees do need to give time to this role. It is not a quick brainstorm a couple of times a year. We do see many where the trustees are so far in the background, they're actually no more effective than shadows, really, because they either do not meet enough, or when they do meet, they don't focus enough to cover what they need to. Secondly, trustees should not be so high level that they don't know what, as trustees, they're missing. Sometimes there can be a lack of awareness of their detailed legal responsibilities. For example, they don't know what effective operational systems are in place in the organizations they're supposed to oversee, or what legal restrictions they have in their charity's governing document, or fail to see that critical regulatory details, just simple things like getting your accounts or annual return to the Charity Commission in, are met by the deadlines. All of those are actually vital signs of effectively overseeing your charity. Now, at the same time, trustees also need to see not only the details, but also the wider, bigger issues. What does it feel like to be part of this ministry? What's the website, accounts, and the way we do things communicate about us and what we value? Are we getting the best and giving the best to our staff and volunteers? And if there was a problem, would we even know about it as trustees? Governance should be dynamic and visionary, actively helping the church in the background, but in a genuinely significant way. It is something that, in my experience, enables the church as an organization to function well and allow the spiritual leaders, staff, and volunteers to do their bits effectively. As trustees, we're part of the body of Christ with our own unique role. I am convinced great churches and ministries need great trustees, and we hope these papers will help give an understanding of what is needed to do that well. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Stephen. We'll link to those papers in the follow-up email, along with a link to the Charity Commission's own 5-minute guides for trustees, which is another excellent resource on this topic if you want to read up more. So moving on to our second item today, it's great to welcome Rachel, who's going to share about online trustee meetings. Rachel.
Thanks, Jackie. So we're going to look at some refreshed guidance from the Charity Commission on charities and meetings, which is known as CC48. Now, I'm sure that many of you are holding your trustee meetings and maybe even your AGMs online, or at least as a hybrid of in-person and online. The Charity Commission guidance calls on charities to review their governing documents to ensure they actually allow you to hold meetings in the way that you want to, especially in relation to virtual or hybrid meetings. If the rules in your governing document aren't clear, or if you fail to follow them, there is a risk that the decisions you make will be invalid. The first thing you need to check is whether your governing document actually allows virtual or hybrid meetings. If your governing document is silent on this, trustees must make sure that everyone can see and hear each other. So that means that a meeting by conference call wouldn't be valid because the trustees could hear each other but not see each other. If you want to hold telephone meetings, or you want to take decisions over email or messaging apps or other communication methods, it's vital to expressly provide for these in your governing document. Otherwise, the default to see and hear provisions will be required. Now, once you've confirmed that your governing document does permit virtual meetings, you need to check what other relevant rules apply. For example, how many meetings are required each year? Is it a requirement that one of them is face-to-face? How will you give notice of meetings? How will a quorum be met? How will meetings be adjourned? The Charity Commission advises that your governing documents should be amended if they don't give enough detail about meetings, or if they have rules, but those rules are no longer workable in practice. The guidance also recommends that charities have a policy that covers in more detail how virtual meetings are carried out. For example, how can people ask questions? How can those online join in the debate? What would happen to the meeting if there were technical problems? For example, you lost a quorum. How will documents be shared and displayed? There are other topics covered in the guidance which you might want to review. They're listed on this slide. You can find the guidance on the Charity Commission website, and we will also send a link to it after this dial-in. If once you've reviewed your governing document, you decide that you need to include or update your virtual meeting provisions, here's a quick refresher of how to do that for charities in England and Wales. If your charity is a CIO or a company, you'll need to take these steps. Firstly, pass a trustee resolution to put the changes to the members. This needs to pass by a majority or more if your constitution requires. Secondly, a members resolution needs to be passed to actually make the changes. This resolution needs a 75% majority or more. Even where your trustees and members are the same people, you still need to follow this two-stage process. Once the resolution is passed, the Charity Commission must be sent a copy of the resolution within 15 days. If your charity is a trust or an unincorporated association, there's usually just one resolution to pass as follows. You pass a resolution using your governing document's rules, or if the governing document doesn't provide for these changes, use the Charity Commission's statutory power. Once the resolution is passed, send a copy of the resolution to the Charity Commission as soon as possible. For all types of charity structure, these changes are not what's called regulated alterations, and they shouldn't require any additional Charity Commission authority. Thanks, Jackie. Back to you.
Thanks, Rachel. That's really helpful. If you have any questions at this stage, don't forget to be typing them into the chat so we can get to them towards the end of the call. So next, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Christina Kopic from the ICAEW, who's going to talk a little about their work on dispelling common myths about charities. Welcome, Christina.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you all for letting me be here and talk about our publication. So as Jackie has already said, my name is Christina Kopic. I work for the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales as the head of charity and voluntary sector. So we're going to cover 3 points on the agenda today. You can see the first 2 are about setting the scene for the session. So we talk just briefly about what ICAEW's role is in the charity sector, including introducing our charity community. And that will just set the scene for telling you a bit more about our publication called Dispelling Common Myth About Charities. So who are we? We are a professional body supporting around 200,000 members and students across the world, really. We are an international organization, but a lot of our members of the charity community are actually based in England and Wales. So within the Institute, we have around 30+ communities tackling special interests, special sectors, different career stages, for example, and they are open to all. So anyone can join our communities. You don't have to be an ICAEW member. For some of them we charge, some of them are free. The ICAW charity community is the one that I look after in my role as head of charity, and that is free and open to anyone. And my own sort of career background is that I trained in at St. Vincent, which is an accountancy firm that specializes in the charity and not-for-profit sector. I've also worked for over 10 years in the sector as a finance professional. I've got over 15 years of experience as a charity trustee, including 3 years as treasurer. And so I'm wearing a little bit of the hats of all of our members. So our community has people from all of these groups, practice, business, and volunteering. And we also, as I mentioned, are open to non-members. So we currently have around 2,000 of those as well. On the next slide, you can see at the bottom, you see the URL. So please feel free to click on that and have a look. But the charity community is essentially a very easy way for you to navigate the content, the webinars, training, and events that we provide for charity finance professionals and also for volunteers as an institute. So I manage that together with the support of 2 advisory groups, one of them being more technical and the other more focused on member support. And Lawrence, who you all know, is a member of one of our advisory groups. So it's thanks to our members that we can offer so much support to the sector. I just wanted to mention that next week we are running a completely free half-day seminar aimed at small charities. So it's designed for the trustees and treasurers of small charities with few employees, less than £500,000 of income. You can watch it live or on demand. So if that's of interest, you've got the link here. We'd be delighted to welcome you as well. So we've got that coming up next week. But let's now speak about our publication, which is what I'm really here to talk about. So last year, we published this web-based guide called Dispelling Common Myths About Charities. And I want to throw it open to you all. It would be really interesting to hear from you about what kind of myths that you often hear from your own networks and when you meet people. What are the common myths that you encounter, things that are really annoying for you to hear about? So for me, the most annoying thing that I often hear about charities is that they waste all their money on overheads. We know that that's not true. We know that sometimes can be true for some of the charities, but overall, most charities are really trying to do the best that they can. But with myths like that, it can sometimes tarnish the whole sector. So it would be interesting if you could use the chat function to put your pet hate myth into the chat so we can see if there's some alignment between the ones that you encounter and the ones that we've come up with. So as I mentioned, we launched this guide about a year ago. We are exploring 10 common misconceptions about charities. And we included for each of them recommendations for charities to improve their practice and their communication to stakeholders. It was a collaboration between our audit and assurance faculty and our charity community. And it was very much informed by the insights from a working party, which consisted of really experienced charity auditors. It was intended, so one of the main aims for us was to counteract some of the ill-informed comments that we see, especially in the press around these myths. For example, perpetuating the perceptions that charities spend too much money on non-direct activities and just build up unnecessary cash reserves, for example. So on the previous slide, you would have seen a URL to the myth, so you can explore that afterwards at your own leisure. But on this slide, you can see all of the 10 myths, and you can have a quick browse through them. And if one of them is something that you would like to tackle in your charity, then please do visit our guide and see the recommendations that we have added. So on the next slide, you can see a few of them highlighted. And this is just really to show you how many of them have to do with financial aspects. So you can see the ones in yellow or orange, they are about expenditure. The ones in green about income, and arguably at least 2 of the others are also financially related. So it's perhaps unsurprising that as an institute of chartered accountants and with a working group of experienced auditors, a lot of them have a financial focus. However, it is something that we also know is important to donors. You might be familiar with the Charity Commission's annual survey around public trust in charities. And if you are, you will know that every year people say that what's really important to them when they give to charity is that most of their money goes to the front line. But what does that actually mean? We know that that sector is quite unique and it couldn't exist without the help of so many volunteers. We know that volunteers outnumber employees roughly 9-1 in the sector, but especially the large charities where most of the income and expenditure is held in the sector, they just simply couldn't exist without paid staff. And even if charities that are run purely by volunteers, they will still have other costs associated with governance, such as having independent examination or audit, paying for insurance. So it's absolutely inevitable for charities that they have some costs that are not directly related to the front line. And it's just for us really important to communicate that, to communicate our charity's cost profile in a way that we can help the public understand why these costs are essential. But on the other hand, we do also know that there is some truth in this myth. Only recently, there was a Charity Commission investigation report about Naomi Campbell's charity, Fashion for Relief, where they found that 90% of the costs, 90% of the money spent was on non-charitable activities. So clearly that is something that we want to avoid. So we have to monitor our non-direct costs and find the right balance for our charities, while also making sure that we invest the right amount in safeguarding and also make sure that we meet our financial and our legal obligations. And we talked about good governance earlier on in this webinar. So we all know that that's really important. We also want to avoid a situation where we are undermining our charities' future success by starving our charities of investment in crucial support services and systems. So I'll just now take a moment to have a look at the chat, because I see that some comments have come through. Charities spend too much on senior management staff. Absolutely, that's one of the myths that we tackled. Yeah, I think that's the major one that I can pick out quickly here. So that's certainly one of the ones that we covered. It would be really interesting to hear from you maybe during the Q&A about what other myths you feel like you need to tackle in your charities, or what is particularly prevalent. But for now, I'll just hand back to Jackie.
Thanks so much, Christina. And if you're interested in attending the event that Christina mentioned, the Small Charities Tackling Financial Governance Challenges, that link will also be in the follow-up email. So we'll get that to you later today. Do keep putting your myths in the chat. It's been interesting to have a look at the ones coming in so far. But let's move on to our next item on the agenda. So this is in a slightly different format. We've been receiving lots of feedback on the frustrations with charity banking and the difficulties that charities are finding. So Lawrence and Christina are both going to share their wisdom on this. They're going to have a discussion on the various issues that have been arising in recent years. So I'm going to hand over to both of them now, Lawrence and Christina.
Thank you, Jackie. Let's hope and pray there is some wisdom in this conversation as well. I think we're both bringing perspectives, and we'll try and uncover some of the issues and perhaps what charities can do in this respect as well to be helpful. But Christina, thank you again for joining us today. Like you said, we work together on some charity issues at the Institute of Chartered Accountants as well, and that's where we've met. And one of the issues that really comes up quite a lot on these webinars in terms of questions people ask, but also through our consultancy helpline with many of the subscribers sending in questions on this and in other places as well, is this issue of charities and their relationship with their banks and the difficulties they're encountering. And it really feels like so many of our clients have experienced these challenges. Is this unique to our clients, churches and Christian charities particularly? I think that's probably the temptation to think that that might be the case. or do you see this elsewhere as well as you see across the charity and voluntary sector in the wider economy?
Yeah, thank you, Lawrence. I think it's a really important question, a really important topic to talk about. It's probably one of the most frequent things that I hear from our own members, often trustees of charities, who are really having very frustrating issues with their banking providers. So one of the first questions that I had when I joined ICW back in 2020, I think it was within my first week of joining, I had a query from one of our council members who was a trustee of a charity. And bearing in mind, this was in 2020, where we had lockdowns and a transition to virtual meetings, their bank asked them just to amend their bank mandate to have signatures from all of the trustees, and those signatures had to be web signatures all on the same form, which would have essentially needed a round-robin mail from one trustee to the other, covering 14 trustees across the country. And there was just no reasoning with that particular bank. So it is something we hear about a lot. It's something that we also know affects other businesses. So my colleagues who work with members in business more, they find the same applies to small businesses. But with charities, I think we have unique challenges because of our nature of our governing boards, all consisting of volunteers.
Great. Yeah, I think we see it in the popular press or the kind of mainstream press as well. You see stories kind of popping up more and more about banks. But this is something that the Charity Commission has also been focusing on. Is that right?
Yes, so the Charity Commission actually, I think, has been really, really helpful there. Not only have they written a joint letter to the chief executives of the UK banks to really raise awareness of that issue and asking them to improve their service, but they've also conducted a survey that I think was published early, I think around March 2024, where they found that 42% of the trustees that they surveyed said that they had poor service from their banks in the last 12 months alone. So that's quite a staggering number.
Yes, it is. It's hugely frustrating. I mean, I'm a trustee of a number of charities, and obviously we advise a number, and it seems like it's quite a wide range of issues and types of difficulties that charities face with banks. But from my own experience, it feels like there's often a lack of understanding from banks about charities and how they function and how it's different from a commercial organization. I mean, I tried to open a bank account for a church once, and the consultant, dealing with it, needed to fill out on the form how the organization makes its money. And I said, well, people donate, people give money to the church. That kind of tends to happen. And the consultant was just totally flummoxed. I mean, the person wanted to ask, like, well, what, you don't sell anything? People just give you money? And it was just, it seemed like it was a totally foreign concept to this person. Is that really kind of a big part of maybe what's at the root of these issues? What kind of issues do people have with banks? What difficulties they experience?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think one of the big issues is a lack of understanding, and we see that reflected in the kind of forms that banks have that don't seem to be tailored at all to charities, and then often don't even allow you to explain why certain things don't apply. They don't have fields where you can add a bit of explanation. So that's definitely one of the issues. I think the other issue is that banks themselves are subject to a lot of regulation, and that is for good reasons. That's to prevent fraud, money laundering. So there are really important reasons why banks are applying a lot of due diligence, and they have to. It's not a choice for them. So they do have their reasons for asking lots of questions, but certainly they should be providing teams that are at least understanding how charities operate, so that those kind of conflicts don't arise because they could quite easily be avoided if there was just better training or specialist teams within banks. What do you think?
No, I think that's absolutely right. It so often the kind of the difficulties charities come up against, it seems, could have been resolved with better training, better understanding from the people who deal with them. It feels like there's a cookie cutter process that's geared towards commercial organizations, and it's just not tailored for charities. And then the answers that charities give don't fit into the boxes on the forms or the systems of banks. And then there's, like you said, there's just no reasoning with them, or moving beyond that. And it's a faceless process. You send answers into to a processing center somewhere, and very often charities send documents even when they've got to send physical documents. They have proof of delivery. Banks say they've not received it, even though there's proof of delivery, and the whole process starts again. And then charities unfortunately get threatened with their accounts being closed at very short notice. So I think there's lots to do and lots to improve. But after some of the interventions, so the Charity Commission of England and Wales, Oscar, Charity Commission Northern Ireland, and lobbying that you've done as well in the ICAEW and other sector bodies, Charity Finance Group and others. Has there been any improvement? Have you seen at least some progress in this space from the banks? Have they responded at all?
I'm trying to hedge my answer here. So I know that the banks, or some of the banks at least, have been engaging. So there has been a guide published, an online guide by UK Finance to help charities navigate the banking process, and banks were involved, and so that opened up a dialogue between the charity sector and the banks. And I know also that the Charity Commission has regular meetings with the CEO of banks to see what can be done. And I think that's always a really important starting point, to understand where the banks are coming from, where the sector is coming from, and to discuss how things can be improved. So definitely seen a lot of that. Have we seen real tangible evidence of banks doing it better? I'm less convinced. And I think that has also to do with banks, with charities being seen as more sort of risky clients for banks to have, because they're sometimes used as vehicles for money laundering. So they are, and often there's not much money in it either for the banks to offer, especially small charities, banking products. It's not a profitable business for the banks. So I think there is definitely a lot more work that's needed. And I think that is happening, slowly happening. But in terms of actually seeing tangible results, I think we are really at the very early stages.
Yeah, no. One of the top podcasts in the country has the kind of tagline or the kind of motto of disagreeing agreeably, and people who listen to podcasts might know which one that is. But I think Christina, I think you and I probably disagree agreeably slightly on this. It feels to me as if that guide from the banks slightly puts the responsibility and the onus on the charities, and tips the kind of focus of it towards charities. This is what you can do. This is what you should do better. This is how you should get your affairs in order. And I don't think that is, in my experience at least, at the root of the problem in most cases. So I think it's helpful. Yes, you're right, that there is progress and that there is engagement at least. And I think we should all kind of persist in this lobbying and work with the banks through the UK Finance, particularly on seeing what can be done. In my point of view, is that banks benefit from guarantees, implicit and explicit, from the government and the public. Banks are considered too big to fail, and they benefit from that kind of support from society, essentially. And I think as a result of that, they've got an obligation to serve the charity and voluntary sectors, the social fabric of society, in a way that maybe they, even if it's not always profitable. But as we wrap up, and I'm sure there'll be time to talk to this in the question and answer session as well. What can charities do in your experience to actually avoid some of these difficulties that they do experience with banks?
Yeah, thank you. I think there's definitely something that charities can do, although I do agree with you that a lot more onus has to be also on what banks can do. But this banking guide that we both talked about, what it does quite well is it provides an overview of what there is out there for charities and helps them choose an account that would be most suitable for them. So the first point is do some research and don't be afraid to ask questions. There are some banking providers that are much more favorable and amenable to charities than others. For example, there is CUF Bank, which specializes in charities. So they definitely have that understanding. I'm not saying that they are necessarily the perfect provider. We know that some charities struggle with lead times. It sometimes might take them a long time to set up an account, but definitely there are some that are better than others. And what the guide also lets you do, you can, for example, check whether they allow dual payment authorization or other things that are really important for your charity. So do your research and also keep your KYC pack ready and always up to date. And that stands for know your customer. So it's the sort of things that banks always ask about. And if you don't know what those questions are, they are all in that banking guide that we talked about. And then keep your banking provider under review and do regular benchmarking exercise as you would do with any other provider supplier. So make sure you review that, because there's more banks coming into the sector, more banks offering charity products. So keep your eyes open for maybe a better provider as well. I would also like to mention, Lawrence, before we wrap up, that there is currently a charity banking survey out. It's not by ICW, but it's by Charity Excellence, which hopefully you have heard of. I hope we can share the link with everyone, because the survey ends next week, Friday. And it's really important for us to collate more and more stories, because that allows us to exert pressure by, raising your voice. So when I spoke to Ian, who's the founder of Charity Excellence, last week, he said he had 100 responses already, and he gave me some of the insights, which I'd be happy to share if there's time, but we can leave that for another time. But please do all complete the survey and share your struggles or also positive experiences that you might have with your bank.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Christina. I think we've got to wrap up this session for now, but like I said, I'm sure there'll be I can already see lots of questions coming in on the chat, so I'm sure we'll come back to that a bit later. Yes, if I can encourage people to complete that survey, we'll send out the link in the follow-up email. Anyone who completes it will be, if you add your email, you'll be sent a link to the results as well, and the Charity Excellence's banking guide and problem guide. And very helpfully in there are some templates that people can use, in terms of responses to some of these questions from banks. So that could be quite helpful. But I think that's it for now from us. Jackie, back to you.
Thank you both so much. That was really interesting. And I can tell it's a very hot topic, because we've had probably the most comments in the chat of you sharing all the difficulties you've been having. I think what may be helpful is I'll give Lawrence and Christina a moment to have a look at all your comments, because they may want to come back with a few comments maybe towards the end of the Q&A session. But we will get to some questions in a moment. Now, usually at this stage, I would talk about our consultancy helpline and our free resources on the website, but we'll send the links out to you in the follow-up follow-up email. So I'm not going to talk about that, but I do just want to draw your attention to two specific things very briefly at this point, both from the Charity Commission. The first is that they've recently updated their guidance, CC12, Improving Your Charity's Finances. Now, who doesn't want to do that? We do plan to look at this in a little more detail, either in the next Sharpen email or the next Dial-In event, but we'll send a link to the guidance later today so that you can have a preview if you're interested in taking a look at that sooner rather than later. The second item relates to some webinars that the Charity Commission are putting on specifically related to faith charities. The ones we've picked out talk about trustee duties in a faith charity context. They've got one on safeguarding your faith charity, Charity Commission expectations, and finally protecting your charity against fraud. And these are all going to be held in November. So we'll send the links to sign up. Places are limited. So if you are interested in any of those, don't delay, sign up straight away. Right, what we're going to do now is thank you. There are some very useful links that have been popped into the chat, so we will lift those out and also put them in the follow-up email, but we are running out of time for today. So if we didn't get to your question, do check out the resources in the follow-up email. Also included will be a very brief survey, and I know your inbox is full of them. You only have to look at a company for them to send you a survey, but we keep it short. It should really take no more than a couple of minutes to complete. I'd just like to say thank you to those of you who took the time to respond last time. We usually have a handful of people who just send us through some really helpful comments. So it's always good to hear from you. Your feedback is helpful. We do look at all of the responses and we do appreciate your time. So if you haven't responded for a while, please just drop us the survey results just so that we can have a look and see how you're finding things. So our next dial-in is Thursday, the 13th of February, 2025. Hard to believe, I know. We do hope you'll be able to join us, and please pass on the invitation to anyone else that you think may be interested. Finally, I'd just like to say a really big thank you to our guest, Christina Kopic, for her expertise, particularly her comments on charity banking. That was clearly a hot topic for so many of you. And also thank you to our panelists, Steve and Rachel and Lawrence, for sharing their expertise, and for all of them for answering as many of your questions as we managed to squeeze in. And thank you to you for joining us today. We hope the rest of your day is good, and we will continue to pray that you and your organisations will be richly blessed, and will also be a blessing to those that you serve in the coming months. Bless you all. Take care.